Hello, I'm Simon Roderick. I'm the Managing Director of Fram Search, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Caroline Doran, Employment Partner at Royds Withy King. Caroline, how are you? How's your summer going?
Yes, I'm very well, thank you. Lovely summer so far, and I've actually had the chance to go down and visit Devon and Cornwall, which I haven't seen despite living in England for 25 years. So I'm using the chance to explore the UK a bit more.
Good for you, Jessica. I think I'm in the same camp. I'm rather ashamed to say that I don't know that area at all, and yet I hear such fantastic things about it. Would you definitely recommend it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I can give you some tips after this.
Perfect. Well, thank you. Caroline, I've been wanting to do this interview for a long time. There are so many changes that have been brought on because of COVID. There are so many stories in the newspapers. And obviously, you're at the forefront of what's going on within employment law at the moment. Before I ask you lots of questions, would you mind just telling people that are watching this a little bit about your background and obviously about Royds Withy King as well?
Yes, absolutely. So firstly, Royds Withy King. It's a top 100 law firm, and we're full service. So we advise corporates on restructuring and litigation, in the financial services and global corporate entities. We also do private client and private wealth management, prenups, postnups, wills, and personally, I'm an employment law expert. So I'm a partner in the employment team and one of 9 employment partners we have within Royds Withy King. The areas I concentrate are on team moves, restrictive covenants, and team moves are actually getting quite busy at the moment. Harassment, whistleblowing and harassment investigations, redundancies, hiring and firing, with a particular interest in financial services and in the city, because I'm based in the London office, having just come back from 2 years in the US working for Royds Withy King.
Thank you for that. Now, probably the biggest change that we've seen since March 2020 is that we're all working from home. Mm-hmm. And I would have thought that for some of your usual work in cases, there's no Christmas parties, so there's no flashpoints there. Things like bullying and harassment, we're not interacting as much as we used to. Have you seen any changes at all to the type of work that you're doing?
Unfortunately, I have not seen a downturn in harassment and bullying. Harassment is still a really big topic, despite lockdown. I think part of the reason for that is that human nature has not changed. And also we're still having lots of different methods of communications, lots of video conferencing, more emails, but also more WhatsApp messages. And any harassment case I've been involved in or had to investigate has involved an element of WhatsApp messages. There was research last year, a survey was done, and 1/3 of the women who responded said that during lockdown they were asked to dress more sexily during video conference calls, either to be, it would be pleasing to the client or to keep up team morale. And 60% of those people who were asked to dress more sexily didn't report it to their HR team. Also, the Rights of Women, a charity, they did a survey this year and found out that 23% of people said that actually harassment had increased during lockdown. And Easy Offices did a survey as well and said that during lockdown, 10% of people have seen a colleague in a partial or a whole state of undress. So part of it is, particularly at the start, there were inadvertent errors. People didn't quite get to grips with Zoom calls, or whether it was a conference call, or what could people see. But there is still a real live issue with harassment happening. And I don't think employers are tackling that head on. You'd mentioned Christmas parties, and a law firm, actually, a global law firm, had a Christmas party in one of the little breakout areas. This is virtually one of the virtual breakout areas, had pole dancing facilities. And also another, again, it's a law firm, they were trying to do an ED&I activity online during lockdown and suggested that there was going to be virtual classes, dance classes, and they'd arranged twerking classes before. I think the head of HR was horrified and cancelled them when they kind of understood what the twerking was. So there is still miscommunications and mistakes being made, but I think also we have new boundaries and we're trying to get to grips with where they are and how we treat the this new way of working that's going to continue, far into the future.
It's quite frightening, actually, isn't it? I mean, the stats you just thrown at us there are pretty appalling, and I should imagine, when you're at home, you can feel incredibly isolated and perhaps, more vulnerable with some of the things you just described. And it's very, and I suspect my experience is that, to be fair to HR teams, that, they're not thinking about the possibilities of WhatsApp and remote communication because why would you? But actually it's happening, and it sounds like it's a big problem. What can people do to counter it, do you think, Caroline? I mean, what are the methods you can use to improve situations and help people in those awful events happening?
Yes, well, there is an issue there, but all problems can be solved. And there was a recent case which was interesting, and it's somebody was defending it was a different type of harassment, but the employer was saying, well, we did training. This was our defence. The individuals were acting outside their boundaries. We had trained them, but the employment tribunal said, well, actually, the training was over 2 years old, so it was stale. So what we need to do is make sure our policies are up to date, do training, and make sure it's up to date to talk about the new ways that we're working and communicating. There's more WhatsApp groups that people have with team members. I think also it's very useful in terms of giving people the tools to deal with the new methods of working is to have an open discussion, perhaps getting the managers or partners together separately to the associates, and talk about the risks to them, because they will be sued as well as the corporate entity if there's a sexual harassment claim. And I think there needs to be a discussion, because quite often people don't appreciate that putting kisses at the end of a message can be misinterpreted, and also people don't sometimes, even though they reciprocate, they only do that because they feel that they have to. Also, we have found that sending jokes or sort of online banter, that's all, quite often an area where people can misunderstand or get offended or upset. And we had one particular case where somebody was getting upset because they were getting messaged by their manager, even sort of informal friendly texts and WhatsApps at the weekend and outside working hours. And they found that was blurring their lines of their relationship. And the complaint that the individual had made was, why wasn't he spending time with his wife and family? Why is he messaging me and sending me jokes late at night? It makes me feel uncomfortable. So there's things like that I think we need to think about and address, and also see what our colleagues are doing. What's the norm, particularly when we're going to be going back to work, hopefully much more, and people are going to be doing more team drinks, team events, socializing, team building with our colleagues. What's appropriate? Usually harassment comes with the standard dynamic, a senior person and a junior, and usually that is a senior male and a junior female, but not always. Is it appropriate to take people out for drinks one-on-one? What's the best way to deal with that? Is a lunch more appropriate? Is it better to do it with team drinks rather than that sort of one-on-one situation? So there's lots of different solutions in terms of how we do it. I also think it's really useful as part of the training to make people do a test at the end of the training, which goes on their personnel file, to show that they understand the basic fundamental principles in terms of harassment. They know that things aren't to be tolerated and that they have a positive obligation to report these per their policy. They're trained on their policy. It's not just this dusty document sitting on a drawer and on the internet, which is never actually looked at. So there's things like that. There's tools that you can do to support people. Also, some firms are looking at setting up task forces, you know, getting people at different levels within the organisation to see what they would find useful. You know, who would they find it useful to report these matters to? Do they find it a bit awkward reporting concerns to HR or to their manager? You know, what's the way to deal with it? But you're right, it does need to be looked at, because my suspicion is that a lot of people aren't reporting it at the moment because they want to keep their heads down, and they're concerned about job security. If the situation changes and there are redundancies or people end up leaving, I think they're going to be more confident about being vocal about these issues.
And you touch a lot there about gender and interactions between genders and things like that. The city's working very hard, in my experience, it has been now for a few years, on trying to improve gender diversity. Obviously, there's a lot more work that can be done, but it is working hard to do that. Has lockdown and COVID improved gender diversity, or in your experience, has it made things worse, or is it neutral? I'd love to know your experience.
Unfortunately, I believe it has had an adverse effect. Bloomberg reported that 10,000 women lost their jobs in UK banks during lockdown, and that more women than men lost their roles. I don't think that is just reflects the fact that quite often women within banks aren't necessarily in an income producing role. I think that might be part of the problem. As you say, there's a huge amount of work that's being done at the moment to encourage recruitment into UK banks, to tie and link senior bankers' bonuses to equality and diversity targets. What I'm not seeing is the same focus from organisations on making sure that the redundancy processes have an ED&I focus. Quite often you might see that maybe 70% of a department within a bank are male, but 70% of the redundancies are female, even though they're all doing a similar kind of role. And from my experience, over the last 20 odd years, when I've been speaking with people and trying to find out the rationales for making people redundant, I've had all sorts of hair-curling explanations when you speak to somebody one-on-one. I play golf with him, it would be difficult to make him redundant. Our children go to school together. His wife doesn't work, but I know her husband does. I've heard people say, she's just recently got engaged. I don't think she's going to be that focused on work. And even somebody saying, she's not that committed. She leaves early on a Friday to pick up her children. She works part-time. So we know that there is a similarity bias. We want to work with people, or we're drawn to people who we have some sort of connection with. And when we see that talked about an awful lot with recruitment, I'm not seeing that the same focus with redundancy and people's exits. And I think there really does need to be, are there panels on, is there an ED&I rep when they're looking at redundancies? Is somebody looking at statistics to try to work out why so many part-time working mothers are being made redundant in a particular pool versus the men that they're working with? So I think there's a lot of progress that has been made, but there's still a huge amount that we can all do to make it a more inclusive society.
And the regulator, Caroline, I think they're putting in place things, aren't they, from what I understand?
Yes, that's exactly right. So there's a consultation with the FCA and regulators at the moment. It's going to close on the 30th of September. And they're looking at extending, tying in senior executives' bonuses with targets. So all major banks are now that's now linked with the ED&I targets, and they're looking at making it the responsibility of diversity and inclusion of the senior executives. And they are part of what they're talking about is getting the sort of statistics we're talking about, and it's not just focusing on the retention. They've got five areas, including retention and reward. So retention would cover the redundancy. So I think there could be quite significant changes that we're all going to have to address in the coming months and years once the results of the consultation come out.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, so much food for thought there. And the other area that seems to get an awful lot of press attention is no jab, no job. You know, you can't pick up or certainly there was one point you couldn't pick up the papers without seeing people talking about it. I keep seeming to ask about these hugely complex things, so I apologise. But
yes,
if you can, in a few minutes, what's your view on no jab, no job?
Okay, well, social care sector is something separate, right. But in the industries that we work in and we're talking about here, unless you're based in the US or working for a particularly brave or renegade employer, it's going to be very difficult. You've got risks. Somebody's been employed for more than 2 years, you've got unfair dismissal. Is it a reasonable lawful order to tell somebody that they need to have to be double vaccinated? Particularly now we're saying that after 4 or 6 months, the efficacy is reducing. So by the time you might be dismissing somebody, maybe the efficacy of the workforce is down to 40%, 30%, 20%. Can that be justifiable? And the real problem area is even from day one or before you recruit them, you've got discrimination, which is unlimited compensation. There was a survey of 55,000 UK workers, and the biggest group that didn't want to get vaccinated was women between 18 and 34 because of fertility risks. Then we have the SAGE has reported that Black workers are the biggest group least likely to be vaccinated, followed by Bangladeshi and Pakistani workers. And we also have even potential of vegans making a claim under philosophical belief because the vaccine had been tested on animals. So it's a really high risk strategy. I think there's other ways. The UK government is cajoling and encouraging. So I think that's probably the best route for an employer to go down.
It's going to be very hard, I think, for politicians to legislate something that catches all of those scenarios effectively. So I'm sure that, you know, if uptake isn't what they hope, then we might see them legislate, but it could get highly complex. So lots and lots of things to think about there. And what are you seeing in terms of, obviously, you know, you've got your legal hat on, but it gives you insight to lots of other things. What are you seeing in terms of flexible working? Is that now the norm? You know, are you seeing any other changes in the workplace and how people are encouraging people back to the workplace?
Yes, flexible working. You know, work-life balance used to be one of the rallying cries that we would hear. So that's people were saying that they wanted more of that within, you know, organisations they were going to go to, and employers were saying that they had a really good work-life balance to try to get people through the door. I think flexible working and the hybrid working is here to stay. I think employers are going to find it, and a lot of my employer clients are finding it challenging to cajole and encourage staff back to work. There does seem to be you know, there are people with legitimate concerns, and then also the commute, and people have found people don't like change as well. We're quite conservative creatures by nature. I do think that hybrid working or flexible working is going to be here to stay. We've all had a taste of it. And whilst we're really keen to get back and meet people and socialise, we're social animals as well, I think it's going to be really difficult not to allow some more flexibility. What I'm seeing a lot of is hybrid working and 3 days a week, core days within the workplace, and then flexibility for those who want to work at home. And the usual core working days, I'm saying Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, which are what most people are selecting, and then flexibility to work from home if they want, unless there's a client need on sort of Mondays and Fridays. It's going to be also difficult for employers if somebody is told they have to come back to work and they put in then a flexible working request. It's going to be quite difficult for an employer to operate one of the 8 reasons you're allowed to refuse a flexible working request, saying, oh, it doesn't work, it hasn't worked, it won't work for your colleagues, or for performance, or for customer needs, because we've all been doing it, or most of the people within the workforce have been doing it for 18 months now. So it's going to be quite difficult to refuse on that basis. Although if you are a working mother, or you have child care and dependent responsibilities, you've got a potential indirect sex discrimination claim if you're not allowed to work at home, because there's been a case recently which the Employment Tribunal says there's judicial notice the fact that most childcare responsibility falls upon working mothers. So requiring somebody to come and work full time or to work weekends on an ad hoc basis is going to have a disparate effect on working mothers.
I think what I'm saying, you're absolutely right that come September, hybrid working will be here for most firms, and it'll be probably 3 days a week in the office with a couple of days working remotely. And I actually think that's a good balance in terms of team building, connectivity, collaboration. But I think it also respects the fact that people worked incredibly hard from home, and therefore, it can be trusted. And therefore, why are we making people commute unnecessarily? There's some great health benefits, I think, from having that variety, but not coming in every day. So I think that'd be interesting. And are you seeing any kind of delineation at all in terms of grading? So, for example, senior employees seem to be getting more flexibility than more junior employees, or is that not something you've seen yet?
Yes, I am seeing that, and I think it's interesting, an interesting point you're raising. Quite often they're saying that the junior people need to come in more frequently, maybe 4 days a week. The more senior people can come in less frequently. They're justifying that on the basis that the juniors need to be supervised. But if you're saying that, you have to make sure that the senior people are there to supervise them in the flesh. So I think that sometimes, I think there's going to be a bit of trial and error. I do think we all need to be flexible, and lots of them, it's a brand new thing that employers are trying to deal with, work with. We're having trial periods, and consult with your staff and talk about what's working, what needs to be tweaked. I think what we have seen is treating people as grown-ups in the last 18 months and trusting them. You can get real benefits. You get a huge amount of loyalty, and people have been working extremely hard. And I think by giving people extra latitude, you buy a huge amount of loyalty from your workforce.
I agree. And I think, you hit the nail on the head there when you say, people need to work together and consult. I think it's both sides, isn't it? Both sides of, need to come together and say, look, let's do this in a nice manner, and let's try and work out the best way forwards, rather than the kind of them and us attitude. I do hope people go into these negotiations with that kind of spirit. Caroline, I could sit here all day and ask you questions, and in fact, I'm sure probably people, might have some follow-up questions. If people wanted to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
It's either through LinkedIn, Caroline Doran Millett at Royds Withy King, or by email, caroline.doran, Doran, at roydswithyking.com, and we'd be delighted to continue the conversation.
Well, thank you for your time. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon, and thank you for talking to me today. It's been a real pleasure, and I look forward to speaking soon.
Excellent. Speak soon. Thanks, Simon.
Right.
Bye-bye.